Welcome to the Surface. Written by Sepia Wolf. Narrated by Brian McKee. Ruby-colored eyes gazed out to the horizon, filled with wonder. Ayache had never been to the surface before, to her memory. The sun captured most of her attention. She enjoyed the colors and the feel of the breeze through her snow-white hair, but the brightness of the yellow orb in the sky and the warm rays that kissed her ebony skin were all she could focus on. Ayache had once been a dark elf, one of the few creatures that thrived in the dank caverns and tunnels deep below the surface. She couldn't remember much of that life anymore, though. Her ideals didn't match those of the cruel dwellers of the Underdark, and so she was punished. Her body twisted and her mind warped until she had been transformed into something else. She still retained her beautiful, lithe elven figure down to her waist, but from there, her body had been replaced with that of a spider. She was a drider now. The 8 spindle legs and the fat, seed-shaped bulb of a spider's abdomen reminding her that she was no longer welcome in her home. A reminder she needed, as her short-term memory was no longer the greatest after the transformation. Scurrying out of the tunnel in the mountain, her 8 legs clicking on the stone surface as she went, Ayache gaped at the green of the valley with childlike wonder. She squealed in delight when she discovered flowers. Pink, yellow, violet, all a rare sight in the pitch-black caves of her former home. A rumbling in her trim stomach brought forth her first worry.
What do I eat? I can't remember what I used to have. Spider Me was eating rats, but do they live out here?
The rats were plentiful for a while in the tunnels, but they slowly disappeared, much to the drider's confusion. She tried to think back to being an elf, bringing back a vague thought of a silver disc that had something piled on it, but she couldn't remember what, or even if she was thinking about, had anything to do with food. Thinking about trying to think about food was making her hungrier, so she wandered, trying to guess what in this strange new world was something to eat. With surprising agility, Ayache snatched up something that moved through the grass. It looked like a rat, but it was much smaller. With a disappointed sigh, she lowered the struggling creature into her mouth. She swallowed it whole, the tail slipping through her slender lips like a living noodle. It tasted like a rat, but it was so small and unsatisfying.
What are you doing?
An earthy voice asked. Ayache looked up. She was so preoccupied that she hadn't noticed another person not far from her. Standing at the edge of a stream was a woman with olive skin. Her long auburn hair had a mix of braids and beads, with the loose flowing locks. From her waist down, she had the muscular body of a horse. Ayache had lost many concepts since her transformation, so it didn't register that she was admiring a centaur. Her thoughts connected in a different way.
You poor thing! You've been cursed too.
The centaur gave her a bemused look.
Are you all right?
She looked at the tattered rags the drider had, barely clinging to her frame. Ayache was still wearing the clothes she had on when she had been changed, and the transformation was not kind to the garment. Neither was an untold amount of time drifting through the tunnels, barely more than a monster. Looking down at her own simple chest wrap, The centaur knew that the Drider was new to her form. The absent tone of her voice suggested that it could have been new to her for a day or years. It was doubtful she knew herself.
Are you lost?
The centaur asked cautiously.
Oh, no.
The Drider shook her head sweetly.
I'm Ayache. Ayache, not lost.
The centaur covered her mouth to hide a good-natured giggle.
I see. I am Briere. It is nice to meet you. Briere.
Ayache closed her eyes and focused. She didn't want to forget. Briere didn't know how to ask politely, so she decided to go for a direct route.
What are you?
Hungry, Ayache exclaimed with a smile. Briere giggled again and shook her head.
And what do Ayaches eat?
The Drider frowned.
I don't remember. I was eating rats, but the ones out here are so small. That was a mouse. What's the difference?
Briere paused and shrugged.
Just the size, I guess. If you like, you can come with me. My kin are preparing lunch right now.
Ayache was sure the word had something to do with food, even if she didn't remember if it was edible itself or if it meant there would be food there. But either way, she licked her charcoal-colored lips and eagerly followed the centaur. Being reclusive nomads, the centaurs weren't familiar with many of the other races' cultures and lore. They certainly didn't know anything about the tales of the evil dark elves and the Driders. But Ayache was so pleasant and innocent that they didn't seem concerned by her presence. Instead, they were curious, regarding her more like a kindred spirit. Despite being arachnid rather than equine, they all saw the similarity between themselves and their guest. Briere set down the bucket of water she had retrieved from the stream and took a rag. She helped Ayache out of her tattered clothes and washed her down with the cool water and the rag, before giving her one of her own chest wraps. Being a fair bit bustier than the elven body, it wrapped around Ayache's figure twice before tying behind her neck, rather than at her back.
Lunch should be about ready now,
Briere said softly as she finished brushing the tangles from Ayache's hair.
Are you ready to eat? By the Spider Queen, yes.
The Drider felt her mouth water.
I could eat like a horse.
She felt that the phrase might have been a little off, and the irony was completely lost on her as her thought process failed to align coherently. Briere raised an eyebrow at her.
It's not said like that.
Ayache didn't seem to hear her as she scuttled over to the log where the meal had been placed. Despite being famished, she waited patiently for her turn, bouncing on her 8 legs eagerly. The children around her looked at her in awe, cautiously touching her chitinous exoskeleton. Since the dark-skinned woman didn't appear to feel it, they started tapping and tugging at her until she turned her head to look at them.
Why are you a bug lady? Where did your horse legs go?
One of the braver ones asked. Ayache's eyes widened in horror.
I'm supposed to have horse legs?
The children giggled, but the adults recognized that the Drider was genuinely shocked by such a revelation. Even in her short visit thus far, it was clear that her mind was not in its right way of thinking. Some were prepared to scold the younglings about being rude, until the conversation between them continued.
I like it. She's really pretty.
A little girl pointed at Ayache's back half.
Can you make webs too? She can't make webs,
another scoffed.
Webs are for catching bugs to eat. She doesn't eat bugs. I don't?
Ayache was clearly getting confused with the constant bombardment of questions. To her mercy, one of the adults shooed them away so that the Drider could load up a wooden bowl with food for herself.
Let our guest eat. The poor girl is wasting away while you talk her ear off. She has lots of ear, all pointy and majestic. She's like a centaur, but a bug, Mommy.
One of the little ones said in awe as she dug her hooves in to keep looking at their mysterious visitor.
A majestic horse bug.
Ayache smiled and blinked as her mind carried off to images of things and flashes that she felt should make her happy. She decided to place that comment in with these thoughts with a wistful sigh. As her gaze went back down, she realized there was a bowl in her hands, piled high with delicious-smelling food. With a slight jump of surprise, she looked around for approval, before a centaur wearing an apron with her hair tied back in a bandana handed her a fork with a smile. Snatching it up quickly, it was in her hands less than a second before she was shoveling food into her mouth.
I'm glad to see she has an appetite.
The aproned centaur breathed a sigh of relief as she approached Briere.
Your friend is so small. Our adolescents are bigger than her.
The two of them watched Ayache as she lowered her spider half to the grass to eat in the shade of a tree. Having no knowledge that she had once been an elf, nor that her build was naturally slight and lithe, the centaurs feared that the poor girl was extremely malnourished.
I wish to take her in, Prue, but I fear the tribe would consider her a burden. It is our way to help those in need, but I'm afraid she will always be in need.
The two of them watched the Drider lick her bowl clean. Her attention was drawn away by a fat bumblebee hovering around her. Ayache tilted her head and watched it with a gleeful wonder until its path carried her vision directly into the sun. She stared a few moments longer than she should and eventually rubbed her eyes before looking with immense surprise at the freshly polished bowl in her hands. Eyeing it curiously, she turned it over and placed it on her head like a helmet, looking immensely pleased with herself.
I'll ask the chieftain if she can stay.
Briere chuckled nervously. She talked to the other tribesmen while they ate, figuring out how they all felt before going to the chief for permission to let her stay. Briere's worries were unfounded, though, as the decision seemed unanimous to give the dark-skinned spider an offer to stay or help her find a home.
How are you doing?
Briere asked as she approached.
I am a majestic horse bug,
she said proudly.
Ayache.
The centaur tried to hold in her chuckle, the bowl sliding off the snowy locks on the Drider's head.
Do you know where your home is?
The perpetual smile in the gleaming ruby eyes faded for the first time, an almost unnerving, airy tone coming from her as she looked toward the mountain.
There is no home. There was never a home. But Aya didn't know until the spider got mad. Never welcome. Just told to leave.
Briere felt the hair on the back of her neck rise as she listened to the strange words in the vacant tone. She understood enough to know that Ayache had nowhere to go, but the ominous tone was chilling.
What would you say about staying with us?
She offered. Her eyes began to twinkle again, and the smile turned back up.
I can't stay here, silly. I don't live here. We can give you a place here, though.
Briere tried to clarify.
Things that are given should not be taken. Gifts are traps.
The tone sounded hurt for the next part.
Both when given and taken. How about a wager, then?
Briere said quickly.
If I win, you have to stay and live with us. What if I win?
Ayache asked, watching a bird flit between the trees.
If you win, then you can stay with us as part of our tribe if you would like.
Briere sucked in her cheeks, tensely waiting to see if Ayache would catch on. The Drider considered the options. Both sounded wonderful to her. It was a win either way, but she decided to play it cool as well, slowly extending a hand for Briere to shake.
You've got yourself a bet. Very well.
Briere breathed a sigh of relief.
It will be a race. We run through the valley, jump through the obstacles along the riverbank and through the forest before pushing the carts up to the top of the hill. Do you, think you can remember that? Remember what?
Ayache tilted her head with a bewildered smile.
The race path I just described? Jump the river, race through the cart, and push the mountain up the forest? Sounds easy enough.
Ayache sounded confident, but her face was scrunched up as though her head was in pain as she tried to rattle off the tasks. Prue, the cook, overheard the conversation and started gathering others to help mark the path. It was a run they all knew well from their teenage years, and it was a contest they ran every year. Briere herself had won in her day. It wasn't so much she wanted Ayache to fail, but she felt that if the strange girl lost, and felt she had to stay, she wouldn't get the idea to leave if her fancy wandered. She led the way to their starting point, the 8 spider legs hopping as they passed through the meadow, where Ayache bounded giddily through the flowers. It almost looked like she was galloping, but she was really just jumping in place.
Are you ready?
Briere asked with a smile and a slight giggle.
Ready for what?
Ayache asked, but immediately slapped her forehead.
Race! Right! Aya, don't forget important things. They're important. Are you ready?
Briere repeated warmly. She truly seemed determined to remember certain things, and it was clear that she was trying. Ayache's face became surprisingly lucid and focused as she crouched down, the tips of her fingers touching the ground much like some of the bipedal humanoids would do, Briere noticed. Play fair and have fun, the chieftain said to the two of them as he stood before them. Briere hunched her human torso with her arms flexed, but she got a little distracted as she heard Ayache muttering to herself.
Play fair. Win. Play fair. Win.
The chieftain reared, slamming his hooves onto his stone with a sound like a thunderclap. Go! Both of them took off. While Briere needed some distance to build up speed, Ayache darted off at incredible velocity. It seemed that she didn't need as much time to speed up, but as they raced through the valley, it also seemed that this was her top speed. Briere was quickly catching up, but she held back a little. Not wanting to discourage the odd arachnid, she lagged behind. Even though she couldn't go any faster, she wasn't out of breath or even sweating as her spindly legs moved like a blur. As they reached the river, several members of the tribe were there to guide the absent-minded Drider. She stumbled as she took a moment to figure out what they were doing, but with the helpful cheers and points, she pointed toward the forest, and after several nods of encouragement, she shot toward the tree line. Briere turned slightly after, trying her best to maintain a sporting second place for the time being. As she weaved skillfully around the boulders and stumps that lined the riverbed, she suddenly realized her generosity wasn't necessary in this stretch. While she had to leap or evade obstacles, Ayache was easily scurrying over them all, using her spider legs to traverse all terrains without slowing in the slightest. Briere couldn't resist a broad smile before putting more power into her running. Not really all that competitive anymore. It was a rush of youthful spirits coursing through her, as it actually took effort to keep up. Not to say that Briere was old. She was a few years out of her adolescence, but she had always been a calm person. Galloping at her fastest pace where she could still maneuver, the two young women were neck and neck. The soft crack of carapace and the rhythmic pounding of hooves were in harmony, and Briere found herself looking again at the arachnid. She was having fun, and she couldn't help but admire the strange guest and wonder what kind of woman was buried in her psyche. They cleared the trees, and without hesitation they both ran straight for two heavy wooden wagons used to haul supplies up as they followed the seasons. Briere tucked her shoulder and started shoving the cart up the hill with ease. Ayache didn't stumble this time, but it was more because she followed Briere's lead. She grunted, her legs flailing and digging deep gouges in the dirt as she tried to push up the hill. Finally gaining purchase, she speared her legs into the ground and had her arms outstretched, her elbows locked, only managing to inch forward by spiking one leg at a time gradually forward. Her whole body shook as she struggled to move the heavy cart. Sweat poured from her face and down her back now, and she let out a sound somewhere like a scream of determination and a cry of desperation. Briere stopped and saw Ayache struggling. Immediately, she released the cart, the heavy wooden structure rolling back down the hill as she abandoned it to rush to the Drider's side.
Ayache, are you okay?
Ayache swatted away a helping hand with the current leg trying to move forward.
Play fair. No help. Must win.
Tears and sweat mixed as they dripped off her face, her teeth grit in determination, but her eyes were squeezed shut. As if with extrasensory precision, she managed to swat away another attempt to reach to her aid. Careful not to harm her new friend still, she felt dizzy as her addled brain tried to sort out what was supposed to be happening.
Aya, stop! This is too much for you! Why won't you let me help? If I win, I get to stay!
The Drider wailed.
If you win, I have to stay! So I have to win so that I can stay! That means you stay either way! Please, you're going to hurt yourself!
Briere pleaded.
No!
Ayache shouted.
Play fair! It won't be fair if I get help and you don't! Then I withdraw!
Briere said.
Now please, let me help! A gift is a trap. I have to do it by myself!
Ayache sobbed. Her arms trembled before giving out. She slipped and crumpled face first into the dirt, releasing the cart. The centaur couldn't move fast enough. There were several sickening crunches as Briere watched in helpless horror as the cart rolled over the poor girl. Her spider legs curled beneath her, but otherwise she lay still.
Call the shaman!
Briere said urgently.
Aya's gonna win.
Her tired voice still sounded cheerful, but very distant as her scarlet eyes looked through Briere as she knelt next to her.
You'll see. Then you'll be stuck with me and be a family. A nice family with fun and happiness. No more dark and cold.
Chanting and the smell of something burning, but with a pleasant aroma, had Ayache opening her eyes. A woman with braided auburn hair was dabbing her forehead with a damp towel. She recognized the woman, but was having a hard time recalling her name.
Are you cursed? I know you, but you seem different.
Briere rose and went to the edge of the tent, calling out to her tribe.
It worked! She's going to be okay!
The sight of the horse body eventually jogged her memory.
Briere! I found you! There was a woman here that looked just like you.
Seeing that her mind was not amongst the things that the shaman's magic fixed, she simply played along.
You found me! Are you ready to join your family? My family?
Ayache rolled over to get her spider legs under her again.
Yes. You won the contest. So you get to be part of the tribe now.
Briere explained. Ayache beamed with glee.
Really? I can stay? I'm so happy. And we're happy to have you.
Briere smiled back.
Come. It's time to properly meet everyone.